promise peace!
I'm not your problem. Your problem is that man with the wallet who wants your land.
Tade woke to the squeak of the gate. Someone was opening the gate and shutting it right away. He got up from the bed without lighting the lamp. Through the window, he saw a gray sky. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but it was no longer night. He pulled on his pants, slipped into his boots. He paused in the doorway and listened. Tirzah was breathing evenly in her room. Bose was asleep in the one next door. He stepped out onto the porch. Cold. Tade put his foot on the ground and immediately saw a sheet of paper on the gate, pinned there by something dark. He came closer. A black thread. Thick, woolen. It was holding the paper. Tade tore the sheet free and unfolded it. Clear out before planting, or your children will be picking stones. Do not scroll. The best part is ahead. Subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment. He read it twice. The handwriting was steady, all caps. Written by someone who knew how to hold a pen, not a random threat. Tade crushed the paper in his fist and turned toward the buggy. It stood beside the shed where he had left it the previous evening after riding to the neighboring village. He walked over and crouched. The right rear wheel, there was a cut along the side, deep and clean, done with a knife or an awl, on purpose. Tade let out a breath through his teeth. He stood, circled the buggy. The other wheels were fine, only the one, so he wouldn't get far and he wouldn't notice right away. He went back to the gate, took the black thread off the board, and slipped it with the note into his pocket. He needed to think quickly, but calmly. No one in the community wrote threats. That's not how they did things. If there was a conflict, they went to the elder. If there was an offense, they spoke with witnesses present. But this, no. An outsider, or someone pretending to be one of them. Tade went back inside. He lit the lamp on the table. He set coffee on the stove, though his hands trembled a little. He sat and stared at the flame. The children must not know. Not yet. First, he had to understand who did this and what they wanted. After a few minutes, he heard footsteps on the stairs. Tirzah was coming down quietly, barefoot. She was 9, but she already moved like a grown-up, careful not to wake her brother. "Dad, why are you up so early?" she asked, taking a seat across from him. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd make some coffee." "Your face looks uneasy," Tirzah said, tilting her head. Tade smiled, though he didn't feel like it. "It's fine. Are you hungry?" "No. Can I bring in some firewood?" "Bring it." Tirzah went out into the yard. Tade heard her picking up logs from the pile by the shed, heard her steps coming back to the porch. Then she suddenly stopped. "Dad," she called, quiet but tense. He went out. Tirzah stood by the gate, looking toward the road. There was a buggy there, old, cracked, and on the driver's seat sat a woman thin in a dark apron and a hat. Beside her a sack and a bundle of things. The buggy stopped opposite the entrance. The woman hopped down and came closer. She moved with confidence, but without swagger. A lean face, dark eyes, tight lips. "Good morning," she said. "My name is Kezia Lapp. I'm a seamstress. I'm looking for work and a place to stay for a few weeks. I can sew, clean, cook. I'm good with children." Tade said nothing. He looked at her. She didn't drop her gaze. "Where are you from?" he asked. "Lancaster County. There's no more work there. I heard hands are needed here before planting." "Who told you?" "No one in particular. I asked around at the market in bird in hand. They named a few farms. Yours is the first along the road." Tade glanced at Tirzah. The girl stood with logs in her arms and watched Kezia with interest, but without fear. That was strange. Usually Tirzah hid behind her father when strangers appeared. "I have 2 children," Tade said, "but I'm not looking for help." "I understand," Kezia replied, "but if you change your mind, I'll be in the village today. Ask for me at Miller's Inn." She had already turned back to the buggy when another man stepped onto the road, the elder, Aaron, from the neighboring farm. He was walking for milk, as he did every morning. "Who is this?" he threw out, looking at Kezia. She's looking for work, Tade answered shortly. Aaron came closer and looked the woman over from head to toe. We have no room for outsiders, he said firmly, especially those who arrive without references. Kezia stood silent. She didn't argue, didn't make excuses. Tade felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't like anyone speaking for him, not even the elder. Stay the night in the workshop, he said abruptly. In the morning, we'll decide. Aaron wheeled around. Tade, you. I said we'll decide in the morning. Tade cut him off and set his hand on Tirza's shoulder. Let's go inside. Kezia nodded. She picked up her things and walked to the workshop without looking back. Aaron stood a moment longer, then shook his head and went on. Tade went into the house with Tirza. He set the coffee on the table. He took the note from his pocket and looked at it again. Sunday. The service had ended at 2 o'clock. The men stood by the wagons talking about grain prices. The women gathered separately, closer to the elder's house, where food was being set out on tables for the common meal. Kezia stood off to the side by the well, washing dishes after lunch. Her hands were red from the cold water, but she didn't hurry. She held each dish a long time, scrubbed carefully, set it on a towel to dry. Tirza and Bose sat on the grass nearby. The girl wove a wreath from grass. The boy pushed a wooden horse along the ground. They didn't go near the other children. They kept to themselves, as they always had since their mother died. She's from another county, Kezia heard a woman's voice behind her. They say she was under a ban, added another. She came to a widower with no family. Alone. That's not our way. Kezia did not turn around. She kept washing. Water ran off the dishes onto the ground, leaving dark spots. And the children cling to her. That's strange, too, as if she casts a spell. Don't say that, Rachel. It's a sin. I'm not saying she's a witch. I'm saying it's odd. Kezia set the last dish on the towel and wiped her hands on her apron. She turned and looked at the women. There were 4 of them. Rachel, the eldest, gray strands showing under her bonnet. Mary, young, pregnant. 2 others middle-aged, both with dour faces. Good afternoon, Kezia said calmly. The women fell silent. Rachel gave a curt nod. The others looked away. Kezia walked over to the children and crouched beside Tirza. Pretty wreath, she said softly. Are they speaking badly about you? Tirza asked without lifting her head. They're saying what they think. And you're not angry? No, getting angry is useless. People always talk. You just have to do your work. Bose scooted closer and laid his head on Kezia's knee. She rested her hand on his back. The boy didn't pull away. If anything, he pressed in tighter. Tade stood by a wagon talking with his neighbor Liam, but he kept glancing toward Kezia. He saw her sitting with the children. He saw Bose leaning against her. He saw Tirza showing her the wreath. Are you sure this is wise? Liam asked quietly. What exactly? That woman, in your house, with your children. She works, nothing more. Tade, I don't mean the work. I mean what people are seeing. A widower and an outsider under the same roof. It raises questions. Let it raise them. I owe no one an explanation. Liam nodded silently and stepped away. The elder, Aaron, came up to Tade. His face was hard, his lips compressed. Keep your house in order, he said without a greeting. My house is in order. Doesn't look like it. The women are talking. The men too. If the gossip doesn't stop, there will be a council. Tade straightened. He looked the elder straight in the eye. The house is in order, he said firmly, and the children are fed. Nothing else matters. It does, Aaron snapped. The community matters. If the community has doubts, that's a problem. Your problem. He turned and walked back to the other men. Tade clenched his fists. He wanted to shout, to say something sharp, but he held back. He drew a deep breath. He stepped beyond the yard and walked toward the windbreak to cool off. There, by the trees, stood a man in a dark hood, his back to Tade, hands in his pockets, motionless. Tade stopped. Who are you? he shouted. The man didn't turn. He stood a few more seconds, then headed into the woods, fast, without looking back. Tade ran after him, but the man slipped among the trees. Only the crack of branches remained. Tade returned to the yard. The children were already sitting in the buggy. Kazia stood beside it, holding a sack of dishes. "Did you see a man by the woods?" Tade asked. "No, I was with the children. He was standing there, hooded. When I approached, he ran." Kezia nodded slowly. "Last evening, I saw someone by the mill too, but he was watching your farm." Tade climbed to the buggy seat. He took the reins. The children were quiet in back. Kezia sat beside him, clutching the sack to her chest. They drove in silence. By the time they reached the house, the sun was already setting. Tade stopped the horse and jumped down. He helped Kezia off the wagon. "Thank you," she said softly. He didn't answer. He headed to the barn. Evening fell quickly. After supper, Tade went to the pantry for a jar of molasses. He wanted to spread it on bread for the children before bed. He opened the door, lit the lantern. The light fell across the floor. Shards of glass lay there. Dark, sticky. Tade crouched. The molasses bottle was broken. The contents had spread across the boards, mixed with something else. The smell was sharp, unnatural. Not sweet, the way molasses should smell. Caustic. He held the lantern closer. On the glass were traces of a white powder. Lye. Or something like it. "Tade," he heard Kezia's voice behind him. She stood in the doorway with a towel in her hands. "Don't come in," he said sharply. "Don't touch anything." Kezia stopped. She looked at the floor. "What is it?" "Molasses. Mixed with something. Smells like lye." She came nearer, but didn't cross the threshold. "This wasn't an accident," she said quietly. "I know." Tade stood, wiped his hands on his pants. He looked at Kezia. "Did you see anyone near the house today?" "No, but yesterday, when I went to the mill for flour, I saw a man. He stood by the gate. Hooded. I asked the miller who he was. He said a new helper. Arrived a week ago." "His name?" "Ford. That's all I know. The miller doesn't know him well either. Says he's quiet, works for low pay." Tade nodded. He stepped out of the pantry and shut the door. "Tomorrow I'll go to the mill. I'll talk to him." "Maybe you should tell the elder." "No, not yet. First I want to understand who's doing this and why." Kezia was silent. Then she said softly, "Tade, if you don't trust me, say it plainly. I'll go. I don't want to be the cause of trouble." He looked at her. Her face was calm, but her hands were clenched. "I'll say so if I need to," he answered coolly. "For now, prep tomorrow's bread. The children need to eat." Kezia nodded. She turned and went to the kitchen. Tade stood in the yard a few minutes more. He breathed the air, trying to steady himself. Then he went to the barn to check the cow. He opened the door. Inside it was warm. It smelled of hay and animals. The cow chewed calmly. The horse stood in the stall, bobbing his head. Everything seemed normal. Tade went to the stairs up to the hayloft. He climbed. Up there lay bales of hay, tools, old sacks. He checked the loft once a week to make sure everything was as it should be. Today, everything was as it should be, except for one thing. On the beam above the entrance, someone had carved words with a knife. Fresh, still pale. "Sell the land, Tade." He stood and stared at the words. His heart pounded. Someone had been in here, today, or yesterday, when exactly he didn't know. But they had been in here. Tade climbed down. He stepped out of the barn. He circled the yard. He saw no tracks. The ground was dry, the grass uncrushed. Someone had moved carefully. He returned to the house. Kezia stood by the stove kneading dough. Her hands were floured, her face intent. "Are the children asleep?" he asked. "Yes, Bose fell asleep right away. Tirza said her prayer for a long time, but she fell asleep too." Tade sat at the table. He set his hands on the wooden surface. He felt tired. Not physically, something else. Tired of not understanding who was against him and why. Kazuya, he said quietly. She turned. Yes? Why did you come here? She didn't answer at once. She set the dough on the table, covered it with a towel. She wiped her hands. Because I had nowhere to go, she said simply. I have no family left. No work either. I heard hands were needed in this valley. I came. Is it true about the ban? Kezia froze, then nodded. True. They put me under the ban 3 years ago. Because I helped a girl run away from the community. She wanted to study, and her father forbade it. I gave her money for the road. When they found out, they banned me. For 6 months, I couldn't speak to anyone. Then they lifted the ban, but trust didn't return. I left. Tade listened in silence. Then he asked, Why didn't you say so right away? Because you wouldn't have hired me. No one hires those who were under a ban, even if the ban was lifted. She raised her head and met his eyes. I don't regret what I did. That girl is studying in college now. She writes me letters. She's happy. That matters more to me than what the community thinks. Tade nodded. He rose from the chair. Go to bed. Tomorrow is a long road. Kezia left the kitchen. Tade stayed alone. He looked out the window at the dark yard. He thought about the words on the beam. Someone wanted him to sell the land. Someone was trying to scare him, using the children as leverage. But who and why? Something snapped outside the window. Tade spun around. Darkness. Only the wind swaying the branches. But he knew someone was out there. Wednesday. At Elder Aaron's house, the women had gathered for a quilting bee. They were sewing quilts for orphans in the neighboring county. A long table covered with white cloth. Patches, thread, needles laid out on it. Women sat on both sides, each with her task. Kezia sat at the end, near the window. She stitched with a small, even stitch, unhurried. Her hands moved confidently. She had learned to sew as a girl, and the work calmed her. It gave her a sense of control when everything else was slipping out of control. Young Mary sat beside her. She was pregnant, her belly already visible under the apron. She leaned closer to Kezia and said quietly, Pretty seam, so straight, I can't do it like that. Kezia gave the faintest smile. It's practice. You'll learn too. A seam doesn't prove a heart, Rachel snapped from the other side of the table. She didn't lift her head, kept sewing, but her voice was cold. You can sew well and think badly. Hands don't show the soul. Kezia didn't answer. She set the needle, drew the thread through. She breathed evenly, though something tightened inside. Mary shot Rachel an annoyed look, but she kept silent too. Hours passed slowly. The women sewed, trading short phrases now and then. Someone fetched water, someone straightened the cloth. The air smelled of fresh bread the elder's wife was baking in the kitchen. Suddenly Kezia felt it grow hard to breathe. Her head swam. She set the needle down and gripped the edge of the table. Kezia, Mary touched her hand. You're pale. It's nothing. Just going dark, Kezia whispered. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't obey. The darkness closed in at the edges. The room was wobbling. Her pulse jumped in her temples, uneven, too fast. Water, she managed, and sank onto the chair. Mary sprang up and ran to the kitchen. Rachel rose more slowly and came closer. The other women stopped their work and watched. Mary brought a mug of water. Kezia took a few sips, but her hands trembled so badly the water sloshed onto her apron. Go get Hannah, one woman said. She knows herbs. Hannah, the community healer, came a few minutes later, an old woman with a lined face and sharp eyes. She went to Kezia, took her by the wrist, felt her pulse. It's racing, she stated dryly. The lips are blue at the edges. This is not from being tired. She took a small pouch of dried herbs from her pocket, shook a bit into a mug of water, stirred it with her finger. Drink it slowly. Kezia drank. Bitterness spread in her mouth, but her heart gradually calmed. Breathing grew easier. Hannah sniffed the mug Mary was holding. Then she looked at Kezia. Did you eat anything unusual today? No, just porridge in the morning and bread at midday. And yesterday? Also the usual food. Hannah nodded and set the mug on the table. Did you handle anything caustic? Kezia remembered the pantry, the broken bottle, that harsh smell. Yesterday, a bottle fell in the pantry. I cleaned up the shards. With bare hands? Yes. Hannah shook her head. The lye got in through the skin. Good thing the dose was small. Otherwise, it would have been worse. She turned to the other women. Let her sit here for an hour. Give her more water. Then she can go home. Hannah left. The women stood in silence. Rachel spoke first. Poisoning at the Brennemans. That makes two. What do you mean? Mary asked. I mean that since this woman came, that house has had trouble. First threats, then spoiled molasses, now she's poisoned herself. That's no coincidence. Kezia lifted her head. Her voice was quiet but firm. I didn't bring trouble. Someone is making it on purpose. Or maybe you're the one making it, another woman put in. So you can stay in Tade's house. So he'll pity you. Kezia clenched her fists. She wanted to answer, but her throat was dry. She stood, though her legs still trembled. I'm going home. Sit, Mary said gently. Hannah said an hour. I don't need to sit here and listen to this. Kezia took her kerchief from the chair and walked out of the house. The air outside was cold and sharp. She drew a deep breath, leaning on a porch post. Through the window, she heard the women's voices. She took offense. Because the truth stings. Or because we're being unfair. Kezia walked home on foot. It was a long road, nearly an hour's walk, but she needed to move, to think, to breathe. When she reached the Brenneman farm, the sun was already tilting toward the horizon. Tade stood by the barn mending the fence. Seeing her, he set the hammer down at once. What happened? He asked sharply. Kezia stopped. She looked at him. And suddenly she felt she didn't want to keep quiet any longer. I felt sick at the quilting bee. Hannah gave me herbs. Tade stepped closer. You should see a doctor. No, I'm better now. But the women say I'm doing all this myself, so I can stay here. Tade was silent. Then he said, rumors always outrun the truth. He turned and walked to the barn. Kezia stood in the road and watched him go. The next day, around noon, a black automobile rolled into the yard. Shiny, expensive, with chrome trim. Such cars rarely showed up in the valley. The Amish didn't need them, and outsiders usually drove old pickups. Tade was by the workshop hewing a board for a new table. He heard the engine, turned. A man climbed out of the car wearing a dark overcoat, a black hat, polished shoes. A smooth, clean-shaven face, a polite but chilly smile. He walked up to Tade and held out his hand. Garrett Lynch, representative of Allegheny Syrup Mills. We're building a syrup plant in this region. Tade didn't take his hand. He set the axe on the workbench and wiped his palms on his pants. I know who you are. I've heard about your plans. Lynch lowered his hand without losing the smile. Then you know the road will run here, he pointed east, and the plant will be there beyond the hill. Your acres fall into the corridor. We need this land. The land's not for sale. I'm paying well, far more than it's worth today. You could buy another farm, bigger, better. Tade looked at him without a word. Lynch pulled papers from his pocket and unfolded them. Here's a contract. $15,000 for your parcel. Cash. You can sign right now. The land is for the children, Tade said firmly. It belongs to them. I won't sell what their mother left them. Lynch folded the papers and slid them back into his pocket. The smile was gone. Mr. Brenneman, children need to live safely. There's been a lot of trouble here lately. You're not in control of the situation. Maybe you should think about their future. Tade stepped closer. His voice dropped, turned harder. Get off my property, now. Lynch raised his hands in a peaceable gesture. I don't want a conflict. I'm just offering a way out. Think it over. He turned to go to the car, but stopped when he saw Kezia. She stood on the porch with a basket of laundry in her hands. She watched them in silence. Lynch threw her a cold look. You understand you're dragging them down, he said loudly enough for her to hear. You bring misfortune here. If you truly care about this family, leave. Kezia didn't answer. She only gripped the basket handles tighter. Lynch got into the car and drove off. Dust rose behind the wheels and settled slowly over the road. Tade stood in the middle of the yard, fists clenched. Kezia walked up to him and set the basket on the ground. He knows about everything that's happening here, she said quietly. I know. It's him, Tade. It's his doing. The threats, the pantry, the poisoning. He wants you to sell the land. I can't prove it. Then we need to find proof. Tade looked at her. In her eyes was a resolve he hadn't seen before. You want to help? I'm already involved. He named me the reason. That means I'm in the way too. Tade nodded slowly. All right, tomorrow we'll go to the mill. We'll talk to Ford. If he works for Lynch, we need to make him talk. Kezia picked up the basket and went into the house. That evening, after supper, Tade stepped into the kitchen. The children were already in bed. Kezia stood at the window washing dishes. He went to the table and suddenly stopped. On the wooden surface lay a black thread. The third. She had tied it into a knot, tighter than the ones before. So tight it would be hard to undo. Tade took the thread in his hands. He felt something cold spill through his chest. Someone had been in the house. Today, while they were outside. Kezia, he called softly. She turned. She saw the thread in his hands. The color drained from her face. Was it here when you came in? Yes, on the table. Kezia stepped over, took the thread, studied the knot. The same one as on the gate, and on the sack at the mill you told me about. Tade went to the window and looked out into the yard. They won't stop, he said. Not until I sell or leave. He turned back. Kezia stood by the table, holding the thread. There was no fear in her eyes, only calm resolve. Tomorrow we're going to the mill, he said again. We'll find Ford, and we'll make him talk. Kezia nodded. That night Tade did not sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of the children, of the land, of Kezia. Someone was playing a game. But Tade no longer wanted to play by other people's rules. At dawn, Tade woke to pounding on the door sharp, insistent. He dressed fast and stepped onto the porch. The yard was full of people. The elder, Aaron, stood at the front. Behind him were Liam, Rachel, and several other men and women from the community, all with grave faces. Among them was Garrett Lynch, in the same black coat, his hands folded. What's going on? Tade asked. A council, Aaron said shortly. The community has questions, for you and for her. He tilted his head toward the house. Kezia stood in the doorway, her face composed, her hands clenched. What council? I haven't broken any law. You've broken our peace, Aaron said. Since this woman came into your house, trouble has followed. We want her to explain herself. Tade took a step forward, but Kezia raised a hand. She came out onto the porch, walked down into the yard, and faced the crowd. What do you want to hear? She asked evenly. The truth, Rachel answered. Why has everything gone wrong since you arrived? That's not a coincidence. I sewed quilts, Kezia said calmly. I taught the children to read. I cooked. I cleaned. I didn't slice the wagon wheel. I didn't pour lye into the molasses. And I didn't leave bits of thread. But all of it started when you came, Aaron pressed. Lynch stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but everyone heard it. I saw her coming out of the pantry. The same day, the molasses was ruined. I saw it myself. Tade turned on him sharply. What were you doing near my house? I was riding by. I stopped, and I saw her. Kezia looked straight at Lynch, her eyes cool. Yes, I came out of the pantry. I was carrying flour. That's my job. Did you see the sack in my hands? Lynch said nothing. Then he shrugged. I saw you come out. What you were carrying, I don't know. Aaron turned to Tade. The choice is yours. Either you set this in order or the community steps in. A formal council and a ban on anyone who keeps breaking the peace. Tade stood silent. He felt something explode inside him, fear for his children, anger at the community, confusion. He looked at Kezia. She looked back, steady, waiting. Enough, he said suddenly. His voice was hard and sharp. He turned to Kezia. You promised peace. I can't gamble with their lives. Kezia went pale. She stepped back. I'm not your problem, she snapped. Your problem is fear, and that gentleman with the fat wallet who wants your land. Don't you dare, Tade shouted. I dare, she said, because I cooled your children with wet cloths when their coughing burned them up. I sat up with them nights when you didn't know what to do, and you know that. Tade clenched his fists, breathing hard. He felt all the eyes on him. He heard Tirza and Bo's step onto the porch behind him. He spoke quietly, but loud enough for all to hear. Go. Kezia stood motionless. A beat, then another. She nodded. As you say. Daddy, no, Tirza cried. She ran down the steps and grabbed Kezia's hand. She didn't do it. Why won't you believe her? Tade turned to his daughter, his face like stone. Tirza, go inside. No, you're being unfair. Bo stood on the porch, clutching his wooden toy horse. His lips trembled, but he didn't cry. He only watched Kezia with wide eyes. Kezia crouched to Tirza, held her close. It's all right. I'll find another place. You're a strong girl. Take care of your brother. She rose, looked at Tade one last time, then went to the workshop where she kept her things. The crowd began to drift away. Rachel cast Tade a satisfied look. Aaron came up and set a hand on his shoulder. You did right. For the community. For the children. Tade said nothing. Lynch walked past and stopped beside him. Now that everything's settled, shall we talk about the land? Quietly, without any pressure. Tade looked at him, eyes cold as ice. Get out. Lynch smiled the faintest bit. Think it over. My offer still stands. He went to his car, got in, drove away. The yard emptied. Only Tade stood there, arms hanging. Tirza sat on the porch, her face in her hands, weeping. Bose lay beside her, hugging the toy horse. Kezia came out of the workshop with a bundle of belongings. She didn't look at them. She walked toward the road. Tirza rose, started to run after her, but Tade stopped her. Don't. Daddy, she's good. Why did you let her go? Tade didn't answer. He watched Kezia's back as it grew smaller. Bose came up and tugged at his sleeve. Will she come back? No, son. She won't. The boy began to cry quietly, not loudly, his face buried in his father's shirt. Tade stood in the empty yard. The children cried. Kezia disappeared beyond the bend in the road. He felt only emptiness, and the fear that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Night. The children finally slept after hours of tears. Tade sat at the kitchen table. In front of him lay 3 black threads. He picked up the first and studied the knot, then the second, then the third. All tied the same way, a double loop, the end passed up from underneath and cinched tight, not an ordinary knot, a particular one used by sailors or freight hands. Tade remembered last week when he hauled grain to the mill. The sacks were fastened with ropes. He had noticed the knots then the very same, double and strong. The miller had said that was the work of the new hired hand. Ford. Tade stood. He put on his jacket, took a lantern, slipped out so as not to wake the children, harnessed the horse to the buggy, and headed for the mill. The road was dark. He drove fast without stopping. The mill stood by a creek, an old wooden building with a big wheel on its side. He pulled up, tied the horse, went to the door, and knocked. No answer. He pushed. It swung open. Inside, the night watchman slept on a bench, leaning against the wall, snoring softly. Tade let him sleep. He went on to the shed where they kept tools and ropes. Those doors were open too. He went in and raised the lantern. In the corner lay coiled ropes. He took one thick, strong, black fibers, the same as the threads on his table. He put it back and looked around. A coat hung from a hook dark, with a hood. He reached into the pockets. In the right pocket, an awl sharp with a wooden handle. In the left paper, he unfolded it. Blank sheets, the same kind as the one with the threat pinned to his gate. Something jingled in the inner pocket. He pulled out a chain with a metal tag, polished bright. Letters were engraved on it. GL. Garrett Lynch. Tade slipped the tag into his own pocket. He took the awl and the paper and stepped outside. The watchman still slept. Tade crossed the yard. Behind the mill, in the shadows, stood a small shack. The miller had said Ford lived there. Tade went to the shack and peered through the window dark inside. He knocked, quietly but insistently. Something moved beyond the door. Then footsteps. The door opened a palm's width. In the crack appeared a gaunt, unshaven face with wary eyes. "What do you want?" Ford rasped. Tade shoved the door wider. Ford fell back. Tade stepped in and set the lantern on the table. "What's your master's name?" he asked, low and hard. Ford edged toward the wall. "I've got no master. I work for the miller." "You're lying." Tade took out the tag and tossed it on the table. It rang against the wood. "I found this in your coat. Lynch's initials. Did he hire you?" Ford stared at the tag. His mouth tightened. "I'm not talking." "Yes, you are." Tade stepped closer. Ford flinched and turned his face away. "He paid you, didn't he?" This was all his doing. Ford said nothing. Tade grabbed him by the collar and pinned him to the wall. "You used children. You frightened them. You poisoned a woman. For money. Who paid you?" "I won't say," Ford whispered. "He'll kill me if he finds out." Tade let him go and stepped back, breathing hard. "Tonight you keep quiet. Tomorrow you speak in front of the community, or I take you to the sheriff myself. Your choice." He took the lantern, the tag, the awl, and the paper, and walked out. Ford stood trembling by the wall, not moving. Tade climbed into the buggy and drove home. He thought of Kezia. She had been right. Lynch was behind all of it, using Ford to scare him into selling the land. And he had driven away the one person who helped him and his children. When Tade reached the house, Tirzah sat on the porch, her face blotched with crying, her eyes red. "Daddy, did you go to look for Kezia?" she asked softly. "No, but tomorrow I will find her. I'll bring her home." Tirzah stood and hugged him. "Do you promise?" "I promise." The Afin May, an open meeting of the whole community, was called rarely, only for matters that touched everyone. Elder Aaron's house was packed. Men stood along the walls, women sat on benches, children hushed in the corner. Tade stood in the middle before a long table. On the table lay ropes, the tag, the awl, and the paper. Aaron sat behind it, stern-faced, with two other elders beside him. Garrett Lynch sat off to the side in his own chair, hands folded, calm. He looked at Tade without worry, as if none of this concerned him. "Speak," Aaron said. Tade lifted a rope and held it up. "This man cut my wagon wheel. He tied the grain sacks at the mill with these same knots. He left threads in my yard." He dropped the rope and took out the tag. "I found this in Ford's coat, the hired hand at the mill. Lynch's initials. He paid Ford to scare me, to make me sell my land." Lynch didn't flinch. He only shook his head. "That's slander. I could have lost that tag anywhere. Ford could have picked it up." The room stirred. People murmured. Aaron rapped his staff on the floor. Quiet. He looked at Tade. "Where is Ford? Why isn't he here?" "He's afraid. He says Lynch will kill him if he talks." Lynch laughed short and dry. "Ridiculous. I'm a businessman, not a thug. If someone is afraid, he should go to the sheriff instead of hiding." Then a thin, pale-shouldered boy stepped from the crowd. Lem Jung, a farmer's son from the next village, 16 years old. He trembled, but he raised his voice. Mr. Lynch told me it was just pressure so the Brennemans would sell their land for the children's safety. I carried notes. I left them on the gate. He paid me $5. The room burst into voices. Aaron rapped again. Quiet. He looked at Lem. Do you confirm this before the community? Yes, I'm guilty. I didn't know it would go so far. I thought it was just business. But when the poisoning and the fires started, I got scared. Lynch rose from his chair. His face stayed smooth, but his hands were clenched. This is all a lie. The boy wants money or attention. I'll go to court. I'll sue every one of you for defamation. Tade stepped closer. You're not going anywhere unless you come back with the sheriff, and you're going to make things right with the boy you dragged into this. Lynch smiled coldly. You think your little community can stop me? I have lawyers, connections, money. You have nothing. Aaron stood. His voice was quiet but firm. We have the truth, and we won't let anyone use our people. You will go to the sheriff, now, or we will take you there ourselves. Lynch looked around. The men had closed in, faces stern, eyes hard. He saw he had lost. He gave a short nod. Fine, we'll go to the sheriff. But this isn't over. Aaron signaled to Liam and 2 other men. Take him. I'll write the sheriff a letter. Let him sort it out. They led Lynch from the house. He walked straight and did not look back, but everyone could see he was furious. When the door shut, Aaron turned to Tade. You were right. I'm sorry I didn't believe you at once. Tade nodded, then asked, And Kezia, you all accused her. What now? Aaron was silent. Rachel, sitting on the bench, bowed her head. We were wrong, she said quietly. We need to find her. Ask her forgiveness. Tade stepped out, climbed into the buggy, and drove to Miller's Inn, where travelers stayed. There, in a small room on the 2nd floor, Kezia was packing. She put everything into a sack, tied it with a rope, sat on the bed, and looked out the window. She was going to leave. For good. A hard wind blew off the ridge, whistling through cracks in the barn. The old shed went up first. The dry boards took flame like kindling. Someone had sloshed kerosene along the wall. The sticky line ran toward the barrels. Sparks jumped in the dark. A hooded figure darted along the fence and vanished behind the orchard. The house was quiet. Tirzah and Bose had run in only for a moment to find the toy horse and a psalm book. When the shed flared, the wind kicked the fire toward the kitchen, and the back hall door jammed. The wood had swollen from the heat. Hearing the crackle, Tade bolted to the porch and froze. An orange tongue was already licking the edge of the kitchen roof. He snatched buckets from the hook and shouted for the neighbors. Men came running with barrels. A human chain stretched to the creek. Smoke leaned across the yard and slammed into the windows. They're inside, Tade rasped. He heaved at the swollen door to the back hall. Nothing. The plank groaned but held. A buggy swung into the yard and stopped hard. The horse reared, and Kezia jumped down at a run. Her hair was tucked under a hat. An old cloak hung from her shoulders. Take the door off the hinges by the back hall, she shouted to the men, already sprinting to the well. We need blankets. Mary from Aaron's place brought 2. Kezia dunked them in a tub, wrung them out, threw one over her shoulders, and wrapped the other around her head and face. I'm going in, she said. No, burst out of Tade, but she had already slid into the black hallway, hugging the floor. Smoke poured from the kitchen, grease sputtered on the stove, the oven door gaped. A coal had rolled out and smoldered on the floorboards. Tirzah, Bose, she called low to save her breath. Breathe through the cloth. Follow me, she whispered, and crawled, dragging the children. The back latch had seized. She braced her shoulder. The metal squealed and gave. Cold air slapped her face. They wriggled out into the yard, into the orchard's shadow where the wind did not choke so much. Tirzah coughed, clutching her chest. Bose shook, gripping the toy horse. Take them, Kezia gasped as Tade scooped the children up. Her legs buckled, and she dropped to the grass, coughing until her ribs ached. By Aaron's order, the men knocked a door from its hinges, used it as a shield, and shoved the heat aside so the fire wouldn't take the rye thatch. The bucket line didn't stop. Water hissed on stone. A shout rose by the fence. Two men wrestled a skinny hooded figure to the ground. Ford thrashed and raved. "Let me go," he choked. "I was ordered." "By whom?" Tade snapped. "Him." Ford jerked his chin toward the road, where the tracks of tires still showed. "To seal the deal," he hacked and coughed, blood on his lips. He said, "Either the land or ashes." Aaron stood still as a post, his face gone gray. He didn't speak until they had beaten the fire back from the house and only the shed smoldered. Then he walked to Kezia. She sat on the ground. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "Forgive me." Kezia lifted her eyes. Her voice was rough. "It isn't for me to say yes or no. Say it to the children and to their father." Tade stood with Tirzah and Bose. The girl held his hand, her fingers cold but strong. The boy pressed his shoulder to his father's leg. The toy horse jammed against his chest. "Kezia," Tade said. The words came hard. "You saved them. I didn't believe you before. That was a mistake." She gave a short nod. She breathed steadily, though the cough still tore at her throat. "They need water and warmth," she said. "Then a doctor." Mary was already bringing blankets from Rachel's house. The women laid the children on a bench under the pear tree, covered them, and rubbed their hands. Hannah brought a jar of honey, small spoonfuls under the tongue to ease the cough. They tied Ford to the fence with his arms twisted behind him. He didn't fight anymore. He only muttered that he hadn't meant real harm, that it was just to scare them. Aaron ordered a horse harness to take him to the sheriff. When the fire was truly out and only steam curled from the drenched boards, Tade sat across from Kezia. They were both silent. The wind became only wind again. "I'll tell the children," he said first. "And I'll tell you. I'm sorry." "That's not a word," she answered slowly. "It's a deed." Morning lifted the weariness from the valley, and the yard came to life. Men raised new rafters, the boards sang under hammers, women set iron pots, children carried water, bold and proud. The air still smelled of smoke and resin sharp, but now peaceful. After bracing the posts, Tade went to the creek. Kezia stood in water to her ankles, washing a scorched shawl. Her hands worked calm and precise, as if each motion closed yesterday's wounds. Tade stopped beside her, close enough to hear her breath, but not touching. "Yesterday I struck you with words," he said quietly. "You saved my children. If you choose to go, I won't hold you. But the truth is this. I don't want you as a hired woman. I'm asking you to stay." She hung the shawl on a branch. Water ran from it in straight threads. She turned to him, and there was no trace of resentment in her eyes, only focus. "I won't be a secret in your house," she said. "No half shadows. Everything out in the open, before the community." "Today," he nodded. "Together." They walked back through the yard. People drew aside to let them pass, and in that was wordless recognition. Tirzah ran up and laid a few blue cornflowers in Kezia's palm. "These are for you," she whispered. Bose turned the toy horse in his hands for a long time, then held it out to Kezia, with the kind of trust no words can buy. "So you won't leave," he said. Kezia crouched and kissed the crown of his head, a brief, motherly touch. She set the horse on the windowsill, as if fixing her intent in place. Elder Aaron came to meet them. His gaze was steady, his voice clear. "Have you come for a word?" "We've come for order," Tade said. "We're asking a blessing." The pause ran longer than usual. Hammers went quiet in the yard. The bucket paused for a heartbeat in a young man's hands. Aaron looked over the people, then studied the two of them as one studies what has already happened and only needs a name. "There will be talks with the families," he said evenly. "That's the custom. But my word here is this. Last night, this woman carried 2 children out of the fire. I won't stand between you and the truth. until evening, live so there's nothing to be ashamed of. Thank you, Kezia said, and couldn't help glancing at Tade with a quick, warm look that held more promise than 10 sentences. Work flowed on. By noon, the rafters met tight and the roof took shape. The women served hot soup, bread, and butter. Tirzah stayed at Kezia's side, mirroring her motions like a pupil. Bose sat on the steps, leaning against Tade's leg, and now and then looked toward the window where his toy horse stood as if checking that their new sign of home was still there. When the sun dipped, the people went home. A lamp glowed steady in the window. The kitchen was clean. On the bench lay 2 children's quilts with even seams. Beside them, the toy horse, as if standing guard over the quiet. The smell of fresh bread pushed back the trace of smoke. Kezia straightened the tablecloth. Tade stepped closer until their shadows touched. He didn't rush, he held out his hand and gave her time. She set her palm in his light, warm. The touch didn't hide. It stood in the middle of the room like an open answer. Agreed, he asked, not in a whisper, but in an ordinary voice, so the walls and the table and the lamp could hear. Agreed, she said, and I won't sneak around. I'm staying as I am, beside your children and your land. They stood in silence, and the silence meant something. Wings rustled outside the night birds, taking their turn. Tirzah drew the curtain as if gently closing the day. Bose carried a small pitcher of milk from the pantry and set it on the table, his own contribution to order. Tomorrow morning we'll go to Aaron, Tade said. Let everything be in the light. Tomorrow, Kezia nodded, and today stay with me. He closed his fingers around hers, firmer. The lamp shone steady. The house took them both in without conditions and without shadows, and it was exactly what they had asked for, to remain together and call it by its right name. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out, because it's nothing compared to what's coming next. If you're under 18, don't even think about clicking next.